You're the chair.
No.
Was a ridiculously rough year, both in terms of the impact to our small business community, to our residents, to entrepreneurs, and Rick Howden played a huge leadership role in partnership with our business advisor, Noah Herr of MCCD, not just in developing the program over the course of 4 small business relief rounds, which you'll hear about momentarily, but he talked through the evenings, through weekends, helping businesses navigate not just the resources that Ramsey County had, but all the various relief resources, talking through various relief programs at the federal and the state level. He sat on panels for webinars to get the word out. Just tirelessly worked throughout 2020 to ensure that our small business community had the information and the relief resources they needed to survive. And so I can't stress enough, in terms of a model, Rick was our hub, and we certainly had a multitude of spokes that created an opportunity for us to be successful in this program. But without Rick, we would not have been able to stand here and deploy the volume of funding and resources that we're able to celebrate today. So thank you so much, Rick Howden. Thank you. And with that said, I will turn it over to you, Rick, to talk about what we did.
Well, thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that very much. It was rewarding as going through the pandemic, as stressful as it was rewarding to help businesses kind of get through it. Our Small Business Relief Fund was administered by CED, and as Carrie alluded to, we worked with our partners at MCCD who operate our Open to Business program, and our business advisor, Noah Herr, was kind of our lead contact there. We also worked with the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability to increase our outreach to different communities through organizations associated with them. And what we do is, though the evaluation was based upon the first couple of rounds through CARES Act funding, we wanted to highlight kind of what we did throughout the year. So starting in late May of 2020 and continuing until March of this year, 2021, we did 4 different rounds. That was a total of $23.8 million. We had over 2,100 awards to businesses. And as you can see, some of our numbers increased. So BIPOC-owned businesses through our CARES Act, that number increased as we got into our 4th round. And I'll talk a little bit about the changes that each round brought forward. Also wanted to present you with some information, the distribution throughout the county in different cities. As you may notice, White Bear Lake, the city of White Bear Lake did an amazing job getting the word out to their businesses and everything, and that's why you see they're pretty high up there on the list. So again, a number of businesses there as well. A couple of the changes that we looked at as we went through the process was we started with a very conservative program. So $7,500, businesses needed to have 1 to 20 employees, less than $1 million in revenues. By the time we did our second round in August, we understood that there was a higher need out there. And this was brought forward to us in large part by our partners at the Alliance. So we added a category for self-employed or sole proprietors. We also dedicated a chunk of funding for creative businesses, so those that may not be considered your typical LLC, restaurant, or retail businesses, and we had our own criteria for those individuals to qualify. And then by December, our third round, obviously the pandemic was ongoing. Expenses were incurring for businesses. If you remember back in November of last year, we had an additional shutdown. So these all added up to additional costs for businesses. And so one of the things that we did in that third round was we increased the amounts that businesses could receive from $7,500 to $10,000 for self-employed or those sole proprietors, and up to $15,000 for businesses with 1 to 75 employees. We had heard even some larger employers were having a hard time, and we wanted to increase that cap on the employee counts. Also increased our amounts for creative businesses. And then we also worked, I skipped over this, but we initially started that the business had to be open and operating by March 1st, 2019. Our second round, we moved that up to September 1st. As we were going into December, there were businesses that had been planning to open, maybe had not started yet. We were hearing that feedback from folks as well. They're saying, we want to open, we want to get going, but we haven't been open, and so we're not eligible for anything. We're not eligible for PPP. We're not eligible for anything. So we expanded that open to March of 2020 as well. And I'll just really quick note, and this was a huge administrative burden for our team at MCCD, but we did not require a reapplication for those who looked to increase. So if a business had received $10,000 and wanted that additional $5,000, they could provide us the expenses that they had incurred, and we would reimburse them. So they didn't have to go through the whole application process. It was administrative burden, but it was worth it, and the businesses were very appreciative of it. Some of our partners that we worked with through the Alliance, the African Development Center, ADA, or the Asian Economic Development Association, African Economic Development Solutions, Black Women's Wealth Alliance, ESNDC over on the east side, the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, LEDC, the Regional Arts Council, the Chamber of Commerce, the St. Paul Area Chamber, Springboard, Urban Village, Women Venture, and also we worked in our first round with the Neighborhood Development Center as well. And then lastly, real quick, we were able to provide about 1,000 relief bags to grant recipients that contain masks, hand sanitizer, forehead thermometers, business contact information, which maybe that's why my phone was ringing more often later on here. But we got a great deal of support from our area businesses, 3M, Ecolab, Target, and Lunds and Byerly's. So that was also led by our extraordinary intern, Jordan Burt McGregor, who put in tireless hours to come in, combine those, and get those out into the community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah for the evaluation piece.
Thank you, Rick. Madam Chair, Commissioners, I am going to share with you some of the high-level findings from the evaluation that we were able to do of the round 1 and 2 of the Small Business Relief Fund. As was noted, some businesses did receive continued funds, and so some of those within the scope of our evaluation may have received more than one round of funding. So I did want to just note that. We had a scope of 4 evaluation questions, and I'm not going to read through these right now. I'll touch on them as we go through the high-level findings. The largest the biggest aspect of this evaluation is that we were able to survey 67% of the businesses that received funds within the first 2 rounds. This is a really high response rate. We were able to also offer a $50 gift card, which I believe did help to promote that response rate. Because of the high response rate, we were able to really do a lot of different analysis with the survey results. I'm not going to be able to go over all of that today, but a lot of that is in the full report, so I do encourage you to take a look at that. But we were able to both understand kind of what were some of the impacts of COVID-19 for these businesses, and also how the grant helped with those issues that the businesses experienced. We also interviewed several of the community partners that were referenced earlier that helped to do outreach and technical assistance with different communities, and reviewed progress reports that were submitted by these partners. So looking at first, what proportion of grants went to business owned by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and did the grants reach the businesses in these targeted communities? We found that just under half, so 44% of businesses in the first 2 rounds were owned by BIPOC individuals. We found that the grants really did reach BIPOC individuals, and that partnering with the community-based organizations was really an important strategy in order to reach those businesses. Although the vast efforts of both of the CED staff, MCCD, and the outreach organizations and really trying to provide access to these grants, we did hear from some of the partner organizations that there continued to be some barriers to accessing these grants, both with becoming aware of them, and also some of the eligibility restrictions and documentation requirements that not all businesses have as part of their business practices. Other barriers that we learned about included cultural, language, and technology barriers that were present for some businesses. Looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, we really learned, we were able to learn a lot about the wide range of difference in how businesses may have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and also what resources and stability they had going into the pandemic that really would impact both the level of need they may have and how much a grant like the Small Business Relief Fund would help them. So businesses really varied widely in what access they may have to business resources, so business loans, business credit cards, savings, and that may have had access to those or to be able to draw upon those. Where others would have to take on more personal risk in order to support their business, including personal credit cards, personal savings, and asking for help from family and friends. Nearly all businesses reported that their revenues had changed since the beginning of the pandemic, with 75% indicating that the revenue had changed a lot since the beginning of the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, we were able to disaggregate the data in a number of different ways, and one of the areas we looked at was the difference for BIPOC-owned businesses. And BIPOC-owned businesses, at least that participated in the survey, which I want to caveat that we have to be careful about generalizing to all businesses, small businesses within Ramsey County, but those that participated in the survey did seem to be more greatly impacted by the pandemic. And that was because of the fact that they tended to have businesses that were more likely to be shut down during the pandemic, being in operation for less years, and having lower annual revenues prior to the start of the pandemic. The Small Business Relief Fund really, what we learned is that it helped in part, but not to completely resolve the crisis for many businesses. And again, as we know, funding did continue beyond the point of when the survey happened, and so we are able to really measure how that continued funding may have had an impact. But for most businesses, it helped a little. But we did find that when we looked at what issues businesses were facing and the extent to which the grant helped them, BIPOC-owned businesses did tend to report a higher level of impact of the grant on the issues that they were experiencing due to the pandemic. The areas that were in general of the greatest impact that the grant helped the most with tended to be unplanned expenses due to COVID-19. So that could include PPE equipment or making modifications in order to allow for social distancing within their business. And also missing payments on business loans or other obligations. I'm going to share a chart because any evaluator loves to show visuals of our data. This visual is showing you the businesses were asked, did you experience any of these as a result of the pandemic? And so across the bottom, you'll see the most common issues that businesses indicated. So the bar charts will show the number of businesses that indicated that was an issue for them. And so unplanned expenses due to COVID-19 was in the mid 300s. The line is showing of those who indicated that was an issue for them, what percentage did the grant help with that issue? And so as you can see, the percentage was in the 90s for both unplanned expenses due to COVID-19 and for missed payments on business loans or other scheduled payments. We were able to collect a number of testimonials through the survey, and just showing a couple examples here, and I'll pick out a few that I think really reflect what I said earlier about the extent to which this grant was able to help to some extent, but not fully resolve issues for many of these businesses. I am very grateful for the support. It really served as a lifeline for my business and helped me survive 2020. COVID-19 has decimated my business. I am struggling to stay open. I truly appreciate the grant funds, but it only goes so far. Thank you for the help that you did provide. Businesses were also asked about their future outlook. And again, this survey was happening at the time of late January to early February, so this is a little dated as far as where businesses may stand today. But at that time, they were really very tepid in how they felt about their outlook, with 50% reporting either a neutral or somewhat negative outlook for their business. A number of the concerns that businesses had were about not ever recovering from the pandemic, never returning back to normal operations, that customer shopping and patronage behavior will have changed permanently, that they won't be able to regain those customers that they used to have because of those changes in just how people are seeking services and patronizing different types of businesses. And that they really had a need for more financial support in order to move forward. Another thing that really stood out is that the health and safety of their staff and their customers were of a high priority. And so none were really pushing for, we just should throw everything to, caution to the wind and just focus on what's going to make us money. They really were concerned about maintaining that health of those in their community. So thinking about how Ramsey County could continue to support businesses during the pandemic, again, ongoing financial support is something that really stood out as a need identified by businesses. Other areas were supporting businesses, again, in the area of changing in how customer buying practices may have changed, and so either in how to regain customers or adjust their business models so that they can adjust with how customers are now interacting with their types of businesses. The vaccination and lifting of mandates are really seen as milestones for these businesses. So of course today we're in a very different place than at the time of the survey. Relief from local taxes, support with marketing, business development, advocacy for business protections and emergency business loans were also noted. And as I mentioned before, different types of businesses really did have different levels of access to resources and very distinct needs that would benefit from customized support. So this includes BIPOC-owned businesses, creative businesses, women-owned businesses, and smaller businesses. We also looked at what can Ramsey County learn from its partnership with MCCD and the Alliance and the outreach organizations. And there we really, we learned that the county and the businesses really benefited greatly from these partnerships, and that that there are, that the data shows that there are a number of businesses that access the funds that may not have otherwise if those partnerships weren't in place. There is a need for improvement to the grant application process and reducing barriers, documentation barriers as much as possible so that businesses have a number of different ways that they can show documentation of their losses or of their need that not all may have access to. A number talked about how they were actually working with a number of different local jurisdictions or even the state, and how they felt like there could be benefit from having more coordination between local government and the state around business relief funds and business support. And some of the partners really felt like they had an impact on those changes that were referenced earlier on between round one and round two, with the addition of sole proprietors and creative businesses. And so they really saw their influence on that process and really appreciated the role that they were able to play with that change. The recommendations that we had really fell into two buckets. One, short-term, which was really about immediate business support, and long-term, which is about those longer-term partnerships and capacity development. And so again, what we recommended was that there is a need for ongoing grant relief to businesses, particularly in the area of rent and mortgage. That was often mentioned as an area of concern. Reducing barriers to small business grant access. Considering working with information and public records to explore how businesses in the county could assist them with alleviating their property taxes. Developing strategies that are specific to support BIPOC-owned businesses and other subpopulations of businesses, including creative and women-owned businesses. And supporting business marketing and cross-business networking. On the long-term side, we looked at the need to really continue to invest in long-term partnership models that some of these partners really felt like there's kind of these incidental opportunities for them to partner with the county, but they'd really like investment in longer-term partnerships. And to expand the range of types of organizational partners that could support a broader range of stakeholders. So looking at how women-owned businesses or creative businesses may be supported within the broader field of business development. Again, intergovernmental partnerships was another area where our partners saw an opportunity, and also promoting collaboration and asset sharing across the community-based organizations, outreach organizations that Ramsey County has been working with. So I'll leave it there, and I don't know if Carrie, you wanted to speak to kind of where things are next.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I think we can absolutely open it up for questions. And one just point to kind of drive home is that especially the long-term recommendations are absolutely in alignment with the recommended actions of the Economic Competitiveness and Inclusion Vision Plan. And so just seeing that alignment there in terms of the vision plan and also what we heard following business relief, I think was really reinforcing, where we should drive our energy moving forward. But I'll pause there for questions.
I think I've had everyone point at me. Just go around in a circle, and I'll. Commissioner Mattis Castillo got me first, so we'll move this way.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good job. It's about who's first. Thank you. This is a really great presentation, and Rick, I really want to thank you. I know how hard you worked, so thank you. Yeah, I have a few questions about geography. So we've broken down BIPOC a lot, and BIPOC in the business community is a great place to start, but I feel like we might need to go even a little further about new immigrant-owned businesses. I know I represent a number of them that still felt left out of this particular group, and the geography. So we have cultural corridors like Rice Street and Payne Avenue that maybe didn't get as many of the grants, and for all the reasons. And so I'm just wondering if we went any deeper on what that looks like. And part of the reason I asked the question is because many of those, especially newer immigrant-owned, first-time homeowners or business ownership here, there's some issues around employees, right? So the whole family works there, but they maybe don't have a salary, and so they didn't meet the requirements, but it's literally their livelihood. So thinking about what that looks like, and if we went any deeper in those areas.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. I know early on we worked closely, and I think Commissioner McDonough brought it to our attention as well on the Monktown market and things like that, where you're right, that their family or the employees, their documentation may not match up exactly with what our requirements are. And I'll just also caveat this whole process by saying this was we were in a rush job. You know, we putting together the applications, trying to make things. And so I'm glad that we had the opportunities to expand and look at that. I will say from those that did come in that had, you know, maybe some questionable, you know, documentation, we did work very hard, and I'll give a lot of credit to Noah, our business advisor, who also is Hmong and has a great relationship with them and did outreach to that community as well. And to then, you know, look at their documents, advise them on what we need, because we have, you know, federal auditing coming up eventually in the future that we need to make sure we have documentation. So it was trying to find that balance. And so we worked with a number of them, but I think your point too, you know, even through the outreach organizations, it only goes so far, right? Because if a business owner, and in particular an immigrant business owner, may not be connected to those organizations. And so I think that long-term recommendations is we have a lot more work to do in getting our outreach out there. I know our outreach partners also want to expand out to kind of touch those, right? And because we were under the pressure of the timing, you know, initially, you know, by the end of 2020, it was all like, okay, head up who we know, let's get, you know, our outreach partners were able to get to people that we didn't have relationships with. You know, we're still a new and growing department in this field, so, you know, we really relied on them heavily. So there is still some more work to do, and I think there were a lot of great lessons coming out of that, and I know a number of conversations I had during that time helped inform our decisions about expanding eligibility and being more flexible with documentation. So I hope that answers some of what you're...
I have one more question. Thank you very much for that. I know that the funds here were related to COVID, but at the same time we had civil unrest, and many of those businesses, again, BIPOC businesses that were impacted by the civil unrest in addition to COVID and then the recovery. How did we navigate that? And I know that you did some extra effort and outreach in that area, but what did that come out as far as in the evaluation?
Well, I will say we did ask in the survey if there were other things that impacted their business during this time besides COVID-19, and about 10% said yes. And when they described what it was either the civil unrest or just general political environment. So we were able to gather a little information about that in the survey, but speak to the...
Yeah, I'll just add, I think it was kind of frustrating because I think some of the businesses that were really impacted had either already received a grant award from us and it were already kind of maxed out, or because of the way that the CARES Act language was, if they couldn't show any impact by COVID, then we couldn't really help them. And so we did do some extra outreach in the area. We tried to get the word out more and more. But there were, I know, a couple of businesses that I spoke with that we just didn't have anything else to offer at the time.
So, Madam Chair and Commissioners, I think to the extent we did work very closely with the St. Paul Area Chamber and the Midway Chamber, who at the time they were doing a lot of fundraising to help businesses along, especially the Midway corridor, and so that they got the word out about the relief program as well. But with the federal funds, we were very sensitive to not targeting, saying, hey, you know, if you're impacted by the civil unrest, these are for you, because our legal team was concerned from a risk perspective, knowing how, you know, very much in alignment these funds had to be with COVID-19 impact.
Thanks. Good question. Thank you. Commissioner Reinhardt?
Thank you. Well, I think that, you know, the partnerships that formed with the CARES funds coming into Ramsey County are absolutely phenomenal. And the really great part about those partnerships is that they will continue and get better. The work that was done by our staff here in such a short period of time, and the model that we were to the state and beyond, actually, on getting these funds out in a way that was not questioned. I mean, we had to do the evaluation because we needed that for ourselves as well as for the federal government. But I think it's important to note how that we got all the money out, and that we were able to show exactly how it was connected so that it was used appropriately. I mean, again, the work was just absolutely amazing on doing that. I do want to, when you were a little surprised by the number of, the amount of money that went into the White Bear Lake area, I want to do a shout out to the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce. It's not just the city of White Bear Lake, but it is the surrounding area, including Maplewood. And they were able to push the information out, had information sessions. They did a lot of different things, and it paid off. Because it was something that, if you're eligible, you should be able to get in there and get the funds. But if you don't know about it, or you have questions about it, or you're so overwhelmed by everything else, and that happened a lot, and it didn't matter where you were, to be able to have that additional information and hear it from somebody that you trusted from the get-go was so important. And I know that that's with the other partners as well. That was a key factor in getting the information out. I also want to talk about the responsiveness of our staff and the community. I mean, not only did we give information out about the CARES funds, but we gave information out about all the resources that were available. Because there were some that we couldn't do, but other entities or levels of government could. And that was also, I mean, the appreciation for that was so phenomenal because, hey, it doesn't work, this doesn't work, but that might. Yeah. And the work that you did with that. And then also some of the gaps that we saw. The hospitality industry was hit really hard. But even within that, there were certain categories that were hit harder because they didn't qualify. Hotels were hit pretty hard, and they didn't qualify for a lot of the things that the restaurants did within the hotels and others. And then the niche businesses. And many of the small businesses, you know, there's one of a kind. And how do they fit? And our staff really, I mean, you tried everything that you could and were able to help a number of folks, even if it wasn't through the CARES funds. And so I think my comments are not really questions about it, but just to say that we did a fantastic job, I believe, and the community appreciates that. And we did it in a way that was transparent and accountable. Because funds coming in are great, but if they're not spent correctly, or they're, you know, disproportionately put in one area versus another, it makes it very difficult for the future trust. So I think it's a great point for us to be at with the ARP funds and with other things that come in, because now we have more time to get those funds out and to make sure that we're really building on sustainability. I know that there's a cliff that could be there depending on how they are used, but I know also that we're working together with the community based on the relationships we built through CARES. So I just, again, want to say thank you so much for the information. And the more in-depth analysis that we can have, the better informed we will be for the ARP funds and moving forward for those that were not, didn't find it as accessible, and for other purposes. So thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I am very sensitive to the time constraints you have to work on and the requirements. And I think the staff from Ramsey across the board say, you know, I chaired the food committee and it was the same issue, but you kind of answered my questions when I raised my hand, and I'm glad that it shows awareness on behalf of the staff, because, you know, on the food committee, we went through even when you form the partnerships, whether it's in the communities of colors or with the chamber, whoever, they're still not reaching everybody.
Right. Yeah.
That's number one. And the fact that you even acknowledge that, because you could go through a list of 1,000 partners. That's great, but it doesn't cover the waterfront. And the one question I was going to ask is, and the reason why I come up is I know that I personally went to about 3 businesses owned by women, and I don't know if there's a different style of how you, but most of them, when I kept bringing back or would go run across them again, they said, we're managing, we don't need, we're managing. And so the issue of immigrant groups that we don't, maybe are not connecting with, even through our partnerships, but also I'm curious about the numbers with women-owned businesses versus everybody else that get money, because I'm wondering if there's a different cultural style on how to do business.
I'd love to answer that question, Commissioner Ortega, because this came up. We would have sometimes weekly meetings with our outreach partners and talking about perceptions of government money came up a lot. And, kind of cultural understanding of what the program is and isn't. A lot of work had to be done to say, no, you don't have to pay this back. You don't have to pay this back. And so I know, some feedback from Urban Village was, I keep trying to share, that this is, you don't have to pay it back, that will help you with the application process. But there was a pride component. No, we're good. We're all right. We don't need that. And so that factors in as a variable within this framework as well, in terms of cultural understanding and how information's being conveyed is so important, which then continues to exacerbate the criticality of partnerships and how information is conveyed. And to your point, we need to expand upon what this small business ecosystem is and understand too, one of the biggest kind of eye-openers was that our small business infrastructure as we know it doesn't have the capacity to do the technical assistance, assisting with filling out the grant application, walking them through, because it was a multi-pronged approach. Okay, now submit this, and then dig out the material. What does that look like? And conveying that in, various languages. And they oftentimes did not have the staff capacity to provide that level of need or to help with disbursement of funds as well. We heard that as well. So there's this supporting and strengthening the ecosystem to be able to reach more broadly is going to be important in terms of resiliency moving forward. And that's a part of the evaluation that we couldn't quite control for in terms of quantitative analysis.
Mr. Carter.
Wow, thank you. This was really very informative, and so thank you for putting this information together and being able to report on the work that we did in this way, and thank you for all the work, of course, that all of you did, but that the entire staff did in making certain that we were able to get out to help businesses that needed it. As I look at the information that you provided, I am wondering, for the valuation that has been done, it's really helpful, especially the chart that is on page 15, to see the impact and to see how we were able to assist against those impacts. And of course, I'm knowing that the information is duplicated. There were some businesses who had multiple impacts, maybe some who only reported on one or a few. But to see our ability to help is great. I'm looking forward to and wanting to turn the page, because this is 2 processes that we've evaluated. There are additional ones that haven't been evaluated. And in particular, as we look at those businesses who have not yet seen the daylight, for survival, to understand the extent to which these businesses will survive. Are you planning those 2 additional? And is there a possibility that we will add a column that actually does focus not just on temporary closure, but what we hate to see, which may be permanent closure? And if in fact that does happen, what are your thoughts about really being able to call out whether it was from COVID or from some other impact as we look down the road at what we were able to do, or what we will have been able to do during this period. And I've got one more follow-up question.
Well, I will speak to the survey did include permanent closure. We don't include it on that chart because the numbers were small. But there were some that noted in their survey, we've actually since closed, unfortunately, so that certainly is a reality. I think that in order to do this evaluation well, we probably would need to look much broader at all businesses in the county and not just those who receive funds. And so that was one limitation of our evaluation, is that we really were only looking at those who actually got funds. So who knows for those who didn't, what their reality may be right now. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity in that area.
Well, I'm glad to hear that the numbers were small, and that there's some thinking about how we might be able to do that in the future, although I realize it's going to be difficult to parse that out. I also just wanted to comment that as we look at all of the work that you did, the flexibility that you provided, the ability to make changes en route as needed, the support that you provide, and the availability to those businesses to help assist them in moving forward. As you look at all of that and the recommendations at the back for the future, those recommendations clearly are for us and apply to any additional assistance we could provide. I am wondering how we can get this information out too, because we are working, of course, with federal and state and regional partners as well. The ARPA Plus funds, coming from those other categories, as well as the regional assistance that may be planned from areas like Greater MSP. We were on the telephone recently with them talking about their thoughts as to how they can assist businesses. So we need to get these recommendations to them as well, to those other partners, are their thoughts as to how we will do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I can jump in to say, post-CARES, and as we headed into what we'll call ARP territory, we have convened weekly calls with DEED and at least our peer county groups to talk through a lot of these challenges and these kind of emerging themes. And I would say capacity building and technical assistance right now are the two kind of critical areas. So it was not surprising to me when we saw the ARP kind of guidelines talk so heavily about business counseling post-COVID. Oh, can you hear me? And technical assistance support as an eligible part of that. And it also falls within Tier 4 of the workshop that the county manager presented to you previously. So that was not a surprise to me based off what we've heard. I think knowing the conversations I've had with DEED and our various partners, they would be very much in alignment with these long-term recommendations, which is why there's a lot of conversation, for example, right now about regional collaboration around the SBA's Community Navigator Grant. We've been working with DEED on that, and we understand that the state of Minnesota will probably only receive either one or possibly up to two of those Community Navigator grants. So we will need to show regional collaboration and not have 8 to 10 proposals coming out of the Twin Cities to better compete. And so we have been working closely with our partners on what that looks like. That requires a hub and spoke model as well, and that will allow for greater technical assistance with the caveat that it gets businesses into SBA lending products. And so there's an opportunity there. There's also an opportunity through the US EDA, but the one kind of critical piece that we've talked heavily with our outreach partners is this idea of capacity building, because whether it's coming from the state or through ARPA funds, there will be additional or even philanthropic efforts, additional funding efforts that pop up throughout the course of the next year or two, and our business community needs help navigating those. And our small business organizations and our local CDFIs need help in staffing up to be able to serve a larger audience.
And if I could just real quickly give Carrie a lot of credit for being persistent in arranging these conversations with DEED and our neighboring counties. It was very important to her that we sit down and have this regional conversation about this. So I wanted to give her credit for that, and then also touch on our partners. They work not just in Ramsey County, but oftentimes throughout the metro and with the state, which is why these conversations are so important, because we saw, you know, in using MCCD as an administrator, they were working with Hennepin County, Anoka County, Washington County as well. Well, by the third round, they had to drop some of those clients, and so they ended up working with just us and Anoka County. So that capacity requirement is true of them. It's also true of other organizations where, you know, they're not just working on behalf of Ramsey County, but they're also working on behalf of Hennepin and working on behalf of the state. And how can we as government entities kind of make it easier for them and build their capacity so that we can get resources here as well. So that's just a part that I'm not sure some folks understand wholly is, you know, these organizations are dealing with contracts, multitudes, and sometimes different departments within counties as well. So, you know, HAP, for instance, a huge workforce portion. They work with Ling and Workforce Solutions. We want to work with them on business, you know, technical assistance. So it takes that regional approach, and I just want to reassure you that Carrie's been at the forefront of that for the last 3 months straight, just trying to hammer this away and leading those conversations as well. So
Delicate way of calling me a pest, but that's all right.
I appreciate your chiming in with those.
Commissioner
comments.
Carter,
It
can
is
you move
very
your
true.
microphone?
Carrie has been, continues to be in leadership in that regard.
yes.
Folks
I'm
can't hear
sorry.
you. No, it's okay.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
Commissioner, there's one additional point, because I think we touched on the strength of the Whitebeard Chamber and the ecosystem that is currently built within the small business community in Whitebeard Lake. And we talked also about this kind of geographic equity and ensuring that we don't have gaps in who we're serving. And I think the goal moving forward in terms of building out and strengthening the small business ecosystem is to create, you know, a strong infrastructure, you know, that we saw in Whitebeard Lake across the entire county, so that everybody has access to the resources and the quick delivery of information that we saw happening in strong areas that have that built-in kind of legacy of support. So.
Great. I want to do a quick time check because we're already at 11:50, and I know some folks need to get to 12 o'clock. I want to give Commissioner McGuire and Commissioner McDonough a chance to ask any outstanding questions and then wrap up quickly. So just.
Yeah, I'll be quick, Madam Chair. Yeah, you've heard that before. I know. Just to say, I know. Just to say, I so love the questions that my colleagues have asked. Appreciate, you know, we all know that we love disaggregation of data, so as much as we can drill down is important and will be important going into the future. And thank you for the collaboration, the regional approach. All those things are great. Because I look at charts, I just wanted to also ask you about the disaggregation, about the kind of businesses was there. You know, there's retail, there's restaurants, and beverage, there's manufacturing, and so if there was any delineation among those, it would be interesting to see. And then on page 15, just to make sure I'm reading the chart right, you know, the blue line is the businesses affected, and the yellow line was the amount given. So the last line, you know, we gave away twice as much as what businesses were affected. Am I reading that right? If you could just clarify that part of the chart. It looks like we just gave, maybe people just got double grants or something. Maybe I'm not reading the chart right, but.
Sure, the chart is speaking specifically to the survey results of what the businesses were given a list of possible impacts that they were experiencing, and they could say yes or no to those. And then for those who answered yes, they were asked, to what extent did the grant help you with this issue? And so the percentages that are shown are of those who experienced that issue, what percentage said that the grant helped them with that issue.
Sarah, Madam Chair, so for example, decrease in foot traffic, many cited it as an issue. The grant didn't solve the problem
I see.
at the same rate as what you see in some other categories.
Okay, so thank you for that. So they were really helped, those ones in the last line. Okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure we were clear on how that was to be interpreted. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Commissioner McDonough?
Yep, thanks, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. You know, lot's been said, but I want to go back to, kind of the accolades and recognition, right? You know, I can remember this so clearly. I called Carrie I'm hearing from my vendors at Hmong Village that they just aren't fitting this, right? Carrie's going, well, it's coming out tomorrow. And I get an email from Rick like 6 hours later. We've adjusted to make sure that these sole proprietors and these family-run businesses where there's really no employees, but there's actually 10 family members there, can fit. And it meant a lot, not only to me that as a county commissioner that my county can be that responsive, but it meant a lot to the community. And it was actually the basis for, future legislation that actually was very specific to the cultural malls and cultural corridors to help support them from the state money, right? And that came from the work that you guys did. I want to call out, we haven't touched on it a little bit, but I can remember again, calling Carrie. I got a call from Jack Swanson in Russell County, and he says, I hear you guys are really doing good work and getting your money out the door on business stuff. How you doing it? I says, I don't know, but I could get you connected to somebody. I called Carrie. Jack called me 3 hours later and said, I just talked to your folks, and we got our people connected to your people, and we're ready to go. And I know Matt Hilgard was sending folks from all over the state to your shop, and you guys were responsive on top of everything that we've talked about. You took that on, and I appreciate that. But the biggest piece was, my question was, what are we going to do with the recommendations, right? Certainly, we know that helps influence us on the art money. Ling's already put that into play, coming and grabbing money on the first day. She could grab money. And she learned from the evaluation, and certainly that's the piece of that. I'm really happy to hear, and I've got a lot of confidence that you guys are thinking way beyond that. Your conversations about the capacity building. And as I was looking at those long-term pieces, I'm looking through that, right? And I always try to look through Elizabeth's 4 pots, right? We own it, we're responsible. Every one of those, there needs to be a convener to keep that wind in the sail, though, right? It might not be our responsibility, but we benefit because we're the convener to bring the people together to build that capacity. Because, whether it's in my lifetime or not, I'm sure we're going to go through another situation. It might not be a COVID situation, but we're going to go through more of these faster, right? It's not going to take from 1920 to 2020 for another one of these to come around. So I don't want to lose the work that our evaluators are doing to help support this, recognizing that in the future, Judd could pull out a whole file on COVID and say, or ever who comes after Judd and says, this is what they learned when they had to go through this in this type of situation. So I got confidence listening to you guys that that's occurring. So thank you.
Before you respond, I'll just say my piece, and then I'll let you respond, because it ties to Commissioner McDonough said. I see a lot of interesting alignment in what we see from what businesses need and what we see from what families need, and what we've learned from this, that we need to balance that program integrity, transparency, and accountability with efficiency and flexibility by reducing barriers and providing alternative documentation and verification, better coordination and alignment with both our community partners, but also our other intergovernmental units. How can ARPA funds help us develop the infrastructure to do this, whether that is technology or coaching and navigation, that relational support? And if you can give us just a nugget in 2 minutes before people have to leave, how will this information inform your work in the future, whether it's ARPA or future budget proposals?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. No pressure, Ryan. However, we do have a draft request for board action working in the midst that takes the recommended actions both of the evaluation work and aligns it with the economic inclusion plan that sets aside some funding to strengthen the small business ecosystem, both in terms of internal capacity building and external capacity building for our small business organizations. And that's for the full continuum of small business to support to include entrepreneurship. Because that's one piece too, that prior to the pandemic, the Open to Business program was intended to create a resource and a toolkit to grow business. And then once the pandemic hit, we were fortunate to have the contract with MCCD and know her and our business advisor to quickly pivot toward business retention and recovery. But we need to get back to entrepreneurship right now and support along that small business continuum. And so you will see that kind of working through the channels. But there's also, we have set, whether it be through Ramsey County Meets Business site or through this Business Resource Collective, that is the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability Leads. Ramsey County has been at the table and has been a leader in strengthening this, and the expectation is that continues, and so that RBA that you will see later on or early in July is supposed to kind of fuel that. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, Commissioners, I'll just add two pieces to it. One, it's an advantageous time to be bringing on an HRA levy. I mean, that's wasn't planned that way, I think we can all admit, but to be doing that is we've got the new report out on our economic vision plan plus the findings from CARES. I mean, that's an ideal way to launch because you can learn from all the things you've all talked about today, and I hope you'll see that in the budget conversations we have this year. I saw it in the preliminary meetings I had with EGCI just a couple weeks ago. The final piece I wanted to mention, there are 4 RBAs currently being developed. I have not seen them yet, but I just want to share with you how this is kind of working because people ask every day. You saw the workforce component, right? There's more to where we may go with workforce, but you saw the first cut to get us in the most immediate spot. Carrie's working on a similar piece that'll go all the way from the housing piece, which is the tier 5, which won't be coming through in July, I don't think, but it'll be saying what are the first elements you got to lay groundwork on right now in July and August to be able to get the infrastructure in place to go. So that piece is coming. The violence prevention work is underway right now. Deputy County Manager Hadeen is leading a big piece there, working with the city on how do we piece all those components together. And then the racial and health equity administrators looking at what are the parts we need to carry forward from our racial equity and community engagement work that are not engaged otherwise through like the federal response to COVID and recovery. And so all 4 of those are in flight. And what I've asked for is give me the whole thing, give me a chance to look at it with our team and evaluate it, and then let's piece out the emergency pieces from the rest. So we're developing with the holistic in mind, even if we end up segmenting as we go. And I look forward to seeing what I get to start reading in the next weeks.
Great. I know folks need to go, and so we will call this adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, really